Ladies, have you ever noticed how sometimes, just when you've started to move on, he comes back? That guy who ghosted you, overlooked you, or said he wasn't ready? Suddenly, he's back in your inbox like nothing ever happened. Why does that happen? Here's the truth: men return, not because of magic, not because of games, but because of how you carry yourself when they're gone. It starts with a mindset. When a man pulls away, most people panic. They try to prove their worth. They chase. They make themselves smaller just to keep a connection alive. But the woman he can't stop thinking about, she doesn't do any of that. She respects herself enough to walk away with grace. You see, when you don't beg for attention, when you don't chase closure, when you don't try to win someone back, you send a powerful message. I am not dependent on your validation. I was whole before you, and I'll be whole after you. That's incredibly attractive. Confidence isn't loud. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about actually knowing your value so deeply that someone pulling away doesn't rattle your foundation. That's when men notice. That's when curiosity turns into admiration, and admiration often leads to pursuit. When you stop chasing, when you stop over-explaining, when you stop trying to prove your worth to someone, you begin to tap into something incredibly powerful: self-respect. It's not something you announce, and it's not something you need to convince someone of. It's something you quietly embody. And the truth is that kind of self-respect is magnetic. It shifts the energy between you and the other person without you having to say a word. Think about the moments where someone pulled away from you. Maybe they stopped calling, started replying slower, or seemed emotionally checked out. What did you feel in your gut? Most of us panic. We go into fix-it mode. We think, maybe I said the wrong thing, maybe I need to be more available. Maybe if I just show how much I care, they'll realize what they're about to lose. That instinct comes from fear. Fear of losing the connection, fear of not being enough, fear of abandonment. But the most powerful move you can make in that moment is not to react from fear, but to stand still in your value. That means choosing not to chase. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you are hard to get. For someone who isn't showing up, it's not about being cold or distant. It's about choosing yourself. You let someone pull away without grabbing onto them. You give them space, not as a tactic, but because you genuinely believe that if someone doesn't see your worth, they're not your person. This is what self-respect looks like in action. It's the refusal to audition for love. It's the quiet confidence that says, if you can't show up for me, I'm not going to shrink to keep you. And that energy, that's what makes people turn their heads. Because in a world full of people chasing love, begging for attention, and compromising their needs to avoid being alone, someone who stays centered in their worth is rare. And people notice what's rare. Men notice what's rare. When a man feels you are not seeking validation from him, it challenges him. It makes him question what he's really walking away from. While others may chase him for closure or try to win him back, you're just living. You're taking care of yourself, focusing on your peace, and refusing to lose sleep over someone who doesn't show consistency. What happens in that silence? It creates space for him to feel your absence, and not just your physical absence, but the emotional space you once filled. The space where you showed care, attention, warmth, and presence. When that's no longer freely given, he starts to realize what it meant. Often, that's when he circles back, not because you manipulated him, but because your self-respect made him reevaluate your value. And if he doesn't return, that's okay. Because self-respect doesn't guarantee someone else's behavior. It just guarantees yours. It ensures that no matter what someone else does, you stay grounded in your standards. You don't beg for clarity from someone who gives confusion. You don't chase after someone who's showing indifference. You don't twist yourself into a version of you they might prefer. That's the essence of magnetism: not performing, not pretending, but protecting your peace. And people can feel that. Even if they can't articulate it, they sense when you're someone who won't tolerate anything less than genuine care and effort. So yes, men often return, but not because you played a game. They return because something about your energy feels different, safe, powerful, high value. They remember how you carried yourself when things got shaky, and that's what stays with them far longer than any text you could have sent or any explanation you could have given. In the end, the most magnetic thing you can be is someone who doesn't need to be chosen to feel worthy. That's when people start to realize what they lost. And more importantly, that's when you realize you were never meant to settle for someone who had to lose you to appreciate you. Confidence isn't loud. It doesn't need to be flashy or forceful. It doesn't come from saying, "I don't care," while secretly refreshing your phone to see if he texted. Real confidence is calm. It's quiet. It comes from knowing deep down that you are enough, with or without someone's attention or affection. That kind of confidence doesn't get shaken when someone pulls away, because it's not built on how someone else sees you. It's built on how you see yourself. The problem is, many people confuse confidence with performance. They think it's about looking unbothered or pretending they're fine when they're not. They play it cool, hold back messages, ignore calls, all in an effort to seem unaffected. But the energy behind those actions isn't confidence, it's insecurity in disguise. You're still acting based on what the other person might think or do. Real confidence doesn't play to the crowd, it plays to your truth. When you're truly confident, you don't need to pretend. You're not obsessed with being seen as desirable. You already believe you're desirable. You already know your presence is a gift. That belief changes everything. It changes how you talk to people. It changes how you respond to distance. It changes how you walk away when you're not being valued. Not with bitterness, not with games, but with grace and clarity. It takes confidence to say, "I care about you, but I won't chase someone who's unsure about me." It takes confidence to express your needs and be okay if someone can't meet them. It takes confidence to love fully, but to also know when to let go. That's not weakness, that's power. Confidence gives you freedom. It frees you from constantly needing reassurance, from obsessing over someone else's mood, from analyzing every word or emoji in a message. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "Does this situation still serve my peace?" You stop trying to control how someone sees you and start focusing on whether their actions align with what you deserve. Think about the version of you that's felt the most secure and empowered. Maybe it was when you were thriving in your purpose, surrounded by people who uplifted you. Maybe it was when you were fully in touch with what you bring to the table. Not just your looks, but your heart, your depth, your loyalty, your intelligence. In that state, you're not desperate for attention because you're already fulfilled. That's when people naturally gravitate toward you, not because you're trying to impress them, but because your energy speaks for itself. You become someone who doesn't just attract people, you inspire them. You challenge them to rise to your level. You make them question what they've been settling for, because your presence feels like a higher standard. And when someone walks away from that, it's not your job to shrink. It's your responsibility to stay rooted in who you are. Confidence means you don't see rejection as a reflection of your worth. You see it as redirection. If someone doesn't choose you, it's not proof that you're lacking. It's proof that they weren't aligned with what you need. And that's okay. The confident version of you doesn't fall apart when someone pulls away. She reflects, she learns, and then she keeps moving. In relationships, confidence brings peace. You're no longer obsessed with labels, timelines, or validation. You're focused on connection, on emotional availability, on effort. You stop asking, "Do they like me?" and start asking, "Do I like how I feel around them?" You become the chooser, not the one waiting to be chosen. This shift is everything. It's what separates those who constantly ride the emotional roller coaster of dating from those who move through it with clarity and strength. When you carry this kind of confidence, you stop being reactive. You don't lash out when someone pulls away. You don't fall into the trap of trying to prove your worth. You simply let people show you who they are, and you respond accordingly. That kind of emotional posture doesn't just change your relationships, it changes your life. Because when you're no longer performing for love, you make room for the kind of love that sees you, respects you, and meets you exactly where you are. Not because you begged for it, but because you believed you were already enough. When someone pulls away, the natural reaction is to reach, to fix, to ask questions, look for reassurance, and try to reestablish the connection. But here's the truth: sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone creates space is to let them. It feels counterintuitive, especially when your emotions are involved. But grace in distance is one of the most magnetic qualities you can show. Not only does it protect your peace, it creates a kind of curiosity that no amount of chasing ever will. When a man feels you pull back with dignity, not bitterness, not coldness, but calm self-assurance, it speaks volumes. It tells him you're not afraid of space, that you don't need constant reassurance to know your worth. It shows that your world doesn't revolve around him, and that's a powerful message. Because it sets you apart from most people who, in those moments of distance, panic and cling. What happens when you allow space to exist without trying to fill it? He begins to feel the contrast. He notices the shift. Where he once felt pursued, now he feels your absence, and that absence speaks louder than any message you could have sent. It's not silence out of punishment, it's silence out of self-respect. That's where the curiosity begins to build. Why isn't she chasing? Why isn't she reacting? What's different about her? Most people respond to emotional disconnection with more emotional effort. Texts, calls, emotional explanations, long messages full of vulnerability that aren't necessarily unwelcome, but often mistimed. But when someone is distancing themselves, they are, in effect, asking for space. When you honor that space, not with resentment, but with maturity, you become someone who is not ruled by fear, but grounded in self-trust. That's the kind of person others remember. Imagine you're in a conversation and you say something meaningful, then choose to pause. You don't rush to fill the silence. You let the other person sit with what you said. That pause, that silence, it's powerful. It invites thought, reaction, and a deeper level of engagement. Emotional space works the same way. When you don't immediately rush to explain, to beg for answers, to make it better, you create a moment for the other person to feel the weight of your absence. And if there was something real between you, they will feel it. This doesn't mean you pretend you don't care. It means you don't act out of fear. There's a big difference. Caring doesn't have to come with desperation. You can care deeply and still choose to let someone go if they're not meeting you halfway. That's not weakness, that's strength. When you choose grace in distance, you shift the dynamic. You're no longer someone who is trying to convince or control the situation. You become someone who simply observes. You give the other person space to reflect. And people often need space to truly understand what you meant to them. Sometimes it's only when you stop showing up in the same way that they start to realize how much your presence mattered. That's when curiosity turns into longing. That's when a man starts to rethink his choices, not because you tried to manipulate him into it, but because your behavior gave him the room to feel. That emotional distance becomes a mirror, reflecting back to him not only your value, but the imbalance he created. And if he's emotionally mature and invested, that's when he begins to move back toward you. Not because you pulled strings, but because your response gave him clarity. In the meantime, you don't wait. You don't pause your life. You keep growing, connecting, living, thriving. You show, not for him, but for you, that your peace is not tied to any one person's presence or absence. That emotional resilience, that graceful response to uncertainty is rare, and people don't forget what's rare. What most people do in these situations is either collapse emotionally or retaliate with coldness. But when you stay warm yet grounded, soft but strong, open but not chasing, you occupy a very unique space in someone's memory. You show that you don't just want love, you deserve it in its most present, respectful, and consistent form. That grace in distance doesn't just draw the right people toward you. It naturally filters out those who were never ready in the first place. Because anyone who can feel your value, watch you respond with quiet strength, and still not move toward you, that person was never truly meant for you. And you'll know that not with heartbreak, but with peace. There's a moment in every connection where words start to feel useless. When someone's energy changes, when their actions stop matching their words, when you feel them slowly slipping away, you might be tempted to speak up, to express everything you're feeling, to ask for clarity, or try to fix the gap with the right conversation. But sometimes, the most powerful response you can give isn't a carefully worded message, it's silence. Not the kind that comes from passive aggression or anger, but the kind that comes from self-possession. Because silence, when rooted in self-respect, speaks louder than anything you could say. Silence creates space. It gives the other person the chance to reflect on their behavior. When you stop explaining, stop justifying, stop filling the void with effort, they're left with the weight of their own actions. They feel the absence of your voice, your attention, your emotional availability. That absence can echo more powerfully than your presence ever did. Because when someone is used to you showing up no matter what, responding quickly, keeping the conversation going, trying to keep the connection alive, your silence becomes noticeable. It's a disruption. And that disruption creates impact. In the noise of modern dating, where everyone's trying to out-talk or out-strategize the other, silence is rare. It's unfamiliar. And what's unfamiliar gets attention. Most people are so reactive when someone pulls back that they immediately try to fix things. They over-message, over-apologize, or over-explain. But when you instead choose not to react, when you sit still in your dignity and refuse to chase, you immediately separate yourself from everyone else. You become the exception, the person who doesn't lose themselves just because someone else became uncertain. Silence doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're shutting down. It simply means you're choosing to protect your energy. You're choosing to stop feeding a connection that isn't feeding you. And that decision is powerful. It says, I will not beg to be seen. I will not fight to be chosen. I will not lose my voice trying to keep yours in the room. This type of silence isn't meant to manipulate. It's meant to create clarity, not just for the other person, but for you as well. When you stop talking, you start hearing yourself more clearly. You stop focusing on their potential and start paying attention to their reality. You stop excusing poor behavior because your silence gives you space to feel what's actually happening. It's in that silence that you can finally ask yourself, do I like how I feel in this connection? Is this nourishing me or depleting me? The most powerful part of this silence is that it shifts the emotional burden. Instead of you always being the one trying to maintain the connection, you hand that responsibility back to them. And if they care, really care, they'll notice the shift. They'll feel it, and they'll move toward you, not out of guilt or obligation, but because they want to. Because your silence reminded them of what your presence once brought. And if they don't come back, that silence saved you. It saved you from over-investing in someone who wasn't ready. It saved you from wasting more time in confusion. It saved you from building resentment by giving more than you were receiving. Because when you speak too much, you often end up negotiating for crumbs. But silence, it sets a boundary without needing to say the words. It says, I'm not here to beg. I'm here to be met. And many people fear silence because they think it will drive the other person away. But here's the truth. The right person doesn't get scared off by silence. They get curious. They get reflective. They come closer. The wrong person, they disappear. And that's a gift too. Because it shows you exactly where they stood without you having to chase the truth. You don't always need to send the long message. You don't need to get the last word. You don't need to spell out everything they've done wrong or everything you've done right. Your silence, your stillness, your decision to stop engaging with inconsistency, that says everything. It says you've reached a point where your peace matters more than being understood. And once you get there, there's no need to prove anything. Because the kind of love you're looking for won't require a speech. It will meet your silence with action. Every time you stay silent when someone crosses a line, every time you let something slide that hurt you, every time you accept less than what you want, you're teaching someone how to treat you. And whether you realize it or not, people are learning from your actions far more than from your words. You might say you want honesty, consistency, respect, but if you tolerate flackiness, half-hearted effort, or emotional unavailability, what you're really communicating is, this is okay with me. We all want to be treated with love, care, and attention. But the real question is, do you consistently show people what you're willing to accept and what you're not? Because in relationships, standards are not set through conversations alone. They're set through boundaries and follow through. You don't train people with lectures. You train them with behavior. When someone starts giving you breadcrumbs, just enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to feel secure, your response becomes the lesson. If you keep showing up the same way, putting in all the effort, making excuses for them, or waiting around, They learn that they can offer the bare minimum and still keep you in their life. Not because they're trying to hurt you necessarily, but because human nature tends to seek comfort and avoid effort unless it's necessary. If they don't have to give more to keep you, many people won't. That's why your boundaries are so important. Not just the ones you talk about, but the ones you actually enforce. It's easy to say, I won't tolerate being ignored, but if you respond immediately when they finally text you after days of silence, what message are you really sending? That it's okay. That your time and attention can be taken for granted, that they can disconnect and reconnect whenever they feel like it, and you'll still be there. And here's the hard truth. People respect what they have to work for. That doesn't mean playing games or being emotionally unavailable yourself. It means having standards that you're not afraid to walk alone to uphold. It means showing that access to your heart, your energy, your time is earned, not through perfection, but through consistency, honesty, and effort. When you set that standard, you don't have to beg for respect. You naturally attract it. People either rise to meet your level or fall away, and both outcomes are wins for you. Because you're no longer wasting energy on proving your worth. You're simply allowing your boundaries to filter the right energy in and the wrong energy out. Think about how powerful it is to say, this isn't working for me, and then follow through by stepping back. That's not drama. That's not manipulation. That's maturity. And it's incredibly attractive, not because you're punishing anyone, but because you're showing that your peace and emotional well-being are non-negotiable. That kind of inner strength commands attention. It tells someone, if you want to be close to me, it requires showing up fully, not halfway, not only when it's convenient, but consistently. People learn very quickly whether they can come and go in your life without consequence. They learn whether you're someone who values yourself enough to say no, even when you really want to say yes. And those small moments, when you choose your standards over temporary attention, those are the moments that shape the dynamic. This isn't about being rigid or expecting perfection. People make mistakes. Relationships require patience and compassion, but there's a difference between being understanding and being a doormat. One comes from strength, the other from fear. And fear is what keeps us in situations that deplete us. Fear of being alone, fear of losing someone, fear that we won't find anything better. But when you trust your worth, that fear starts to lose its power. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop bending your boundaries just to keep someone around. You stop hoping that they'll change if you just hold on a little longer. Instead, you step into your self-respect and say, if this is how it's going to be, I'm going to choose myself. And that choice is everything. Because here's what happens when you teach people how to treat you through your actions. They either level up or they leave. And either way, you win, because you're no longer accepting breadcrumbs. You're building a life and relationships where full meals are the standard, where love is mutual, effort is balanced, and your value is never up for debate. Letting go of the need to control the outcome in a relationship is one of the hardest things to do, especially when your heart is deeply invested. When you care about someone, it's natural to want things to work out. You imagine what it could be, what it should be, and you hold on to the potential, the hope, the story you've built in your head. But that attachment to outcome is often the very thing that creates emotional tension, anxiety, and misalignment. Because you're no longer present in the connection, you're gripping a future you can't guarantee. When you release that grip and step back from the desire to control how things unfold, you reclaim your peace. You stop trying to manipulate the timing, the behavior, or the emotional responses of another person. You begin to operate from a place of trust in yourself, trust in your worth, and trust that what's meant for you doesn't need to be chased or forced. That mindset doesn't just change your emotional experience, it changes how others experience you. There's a certain calm confidence in someone who can hold space for love without needing to rush it, without needing to lock it down immediately or turn it into something just to soothe their insecurity. That energy is magnetic because it says, I'm open to something real, but I'm not desperate for it. It says, I'd love for this to grow, but I won't sacrifice my standards or sanity trying to make it happen. When you carry that kind of emotional posture, People feel it. They feel the lack of pressure, and that makes them feel safer, more drawn in, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity and connection. Letting go of outcomes doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care without attachment. You give your time, your love, your attention freely, but with boundaries. You're able to say, "This is how I feel. This is what I want." And if you're not on the same page, that's okay. But I'm not going to twist myself to fit a story that isn't being co-written. That's the difference between intention and expectation. You can have strong intentions. You can show up authentically, be open to love, be hopeful. But expectation is when you start projecting specific timelines or needing things to unfold a certain way. That pressure creates resistance. People feel when they're being cornered emotionally, and often they pull away not because they don't care, but because the weight of your expectation doesn't leave room for natural growth. You've probably experienced this before from the other side, when someone liked you, but there was a pressure behind their attention, a need to know where this is going, a constant anxiety about the relationship. That energy doesn't create closeness, it creates caution. But when someone comes into your life with a sense of security and presence, when they're able to say, "I'm enjoying this, I'm here, let's see where it goes," without forcing it, that feels peaceful, that feels safe. That's what you want to embody, a sense of emotional detachment, not from the person, but from the result. Because no matter how much you care about someone, the truth is you can't control how they feel when they'll be ready, or if they'll meet you where you are. And trying to control that doesn't actually bring you closer. It creates fear. And fear-based actions in relationships rarely lead to connection. When you let go of the need to control the ending, you give yourself the freedom to be in the moment, to actually enjoy the connection for what it is, not what you hope it will become. And that's when the most powerful thing happens. The relationship starts to evolve naturally, because you're no longer coming from a place of fear. You're not trying to win love. You're letting love unfold, trusting that if it's real, it won't require force. And if it doesn't grow, you'll be okay. That's the beauty of surrender. It doesn't make you passive. It makes you powerful, because you're no longer at the mercy of someone else's choices to determine your peace. You stop gripping, stop chasing, stop overanalyzing every word and action. You simply allow. And in that allowing, you either grow together or you grow apart. But either way, you grow. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means giving in to what's real, not what's imagined. It means honoring the connection while also honoring yourself. Because the kind of love that lasts doesn't need to be controlled. It needs to be nurtured, respected, and most of all, chosen. And the right person will never need you to force that choice.